for complete disclosure, in addition to KER and Hubbard Alltech, prior to Hubbard Alltech, I was Director of Research and New Product Development for Purina Equine Business Group for about 10 years after I left K-State. Went to the dark side, as my colleagues at K-State would suggest. It was anything but dark going into industry, actually. And in my more youthful days, I was actually been over, like most of you, as a farrier, and actually had a introductory to horseshoeing class at K-State, and one of the primary objectives turned out to be students that really appreciated their farrier by the time they were done and had no problem writing them a check going forward, which was a good objective to have, actually. So that by the title, you would suggest that I'm fairly negative when it comes to supplements. I'm not, but I am pretty negative and get pretty irritated about the plethora of supplements out there that do nothing but extract dollars from your bank account for the most part. And so that's where I have a real issue sometimes. So I want to touch on some things about quality and efficacy. And we're hardly going to scratch the surface here in an hour, but it'll give you some things to think about. It might give you some resources to be able to go to and check as far as supplements going forward. But there's one thing, those of you that are sitting in here obviously have some kind of interest in nutrition and supplements, because you probably get asked on more than one occasion from your clientele about nutrition or supplements, and this is important. And if you look at this information, what this is a highlight of, it highlights the information about horse owners' likelihood to follow advice. And this was done several years ago, but it's follow advice about nutrition primarily, okay? And as you would expect, the veterinarian is at the top of that list of likelihood to follow nutritional advice. Unfortunately, vets know little to nothing about nutrition. They don't receive any kind of nutritional training in vet school. They usually have to provide an answer, because that's what they're in the business, and the best answer they like to provide is to point to a product that they have confidence in, and that's generally a good answer. But they really don't have any nutritional training. Well, look who's the second most followed advice on that list. You all sitting out here. So your clients really listen to what you have to say, certainly about hoof and hoof health and well-being, but also about nutrition and how it may impact the hoof. So whether you like it or not, you are responsible. You are held to a higher standard. And with that standard comes the responsibility of hopefully trying to educate yourself a little bit about recommendations you might make, so that you feel confident in the recommendations that you make, because your clients really believe you and have faith in what you're telling them. So to me, that means you now have kind of a heavy responsibility to try to learn as much as you can, and just not make off-the-cuff recommendation that just taps your bank account. And then you can go down the list and see others that are on there. But the important thing is the veterinarian and the farrier are really the ones that horse owners look to work closely with. Get rid of this thing. So the question, are supplements ever of any value? Well, yes. They are of value for some horses some of the time. But it should never be a feeding program, right? Supplements are never designed to be a substitute for a well-balanced, high-quality diet that's managed effectively. And if that's your key to success nutritionally, you're really missing the big picture. It needs to be a high-quality feed, high-quality forage. Is there reasonable efficacy data that someone can show you regarding a supplement that says, yeah, we've kind of done our homework here, and this stuff will do that, right? And quality and purpose of the ingredients. You'll see supplements out there that may be intended for a specific purpose, and usually that means there's just 2 or 3 particular ingredients that might drive that purpose, but they may be loaded up with 15 or 20 other ingredients. For what purpose, I'm not really sure, other than if it's a kind of a broad-based supplement that wants to address digestive health and maybe immune function and maybe gastric ulcers. And by the way, we're putting biotin in there to help with the hoof, and we think you're protein deficient, so we're going to... If you got a broad spectrum supplement, okay, but don't position a supplement, in my opinion, for a specific reason, and then add 20 other ingredients to that supplement that really have no particular benefit to that particular supplement's purpose. And we're going to talk about that a little bit with regard to biotin or hoof supplements in general, okay? So kind of be cognizant of that when you're looking and evaluating supplements. As the ingredient list gets longer, generally they are more of just a broad spectrum. By the way, if they expand that ingredient list, what does that also allow them to do? Generally. Pardon? Somebody said it.
Raise the price?
Yeah, they can charge more by a broader spectrum ingredient, because a lot of times, how do horse owners often make their decision about a nutritional product? What's the most important guide to them usually, besides the farrier and the veterinarian if you're talking to them? But when they go into a store, what is it that they look at to help them make a decision?
Price.
Price is one.
Packaging.
Pardon?
Packaging.
The packaging, or more importantly, what's the tag say, right? What's the ingredient list? And of course, the one with the most ingredients wins, right? So sometimes that's how they're making their evaluation. And sometimes supplement companies will tend to leverage that a little bit. So there's a cost per amount of active ingredients. So there is cost. There's cost of this particular supplement, right, in this particular container. But for the active ingredient that's really going to help the purpose where you need it, what's the cost per active ingredient that I'm providing that horse per day? That really becomes the question of the value of that supplement, rather than this 1 pound package costs this much and this 1 pound package costs the same. The problem is this 1 pound package has half the active ingredient that you'd really like to be delivering compared to the other one. You follow me? Make sense? Yeah. So a rationale for providing the owner peace of mind, right? Although supplements may not have a nutritional purpose or value, they do have a value when it comes to providing horse owners peace of mind. And is that of a value? It sure as heck is, because that's what drives a lot of supplement sales. And that's okay. If a horse owner wants to spend their money to provide a supplement because they're going to feel a little bit better knowing old Bucky's got this supplement that's going to make them feel better and do better in their mind, then so be it. Then it becomes maybe part of your responsibility to help direct them at least to a supplement that can provide that, quote, need, even though it's not a real need, it might be a psychological need, for as cost effectively as possible, right? Or for sure something that's not going to do any harm. So let's talk about how all this is then sort of regulated with regards to supplements. So only approved ingredients can be used in feeds, okay? Like 50-pound bags of horse feed. So if it's a feed, it has a list of approved ingredients that can only be used in horse feed. And you can't use an unapproved ingredient. And that's a list established and approved by USDA, FDA, right? If it's a feed ingredient, an essential dietary nutrient must meet tag guarantees, right? So if they say this much is in there, it better be in there, because there's federal testing that will come from FDA or USDA, go around and sample feeds occasionally and look and see if they meet tag guarantees. And if they don't, you get a nasty letter from the FDA saying, you need to address this ASAP, otherwise we're going to ask you to pull that feed off the shelf. Or that may prompt a further investigation at the plant. Now here's an interesting kind of regulatory classification. If it's a drug, it has to treat or prevent a specific health-related condition. And if you label something as a drug that's going to treat or prevent a specific health-related condition, man, you're going to have a lot of hoops and millions of dollars to go through to meet FDA regulations, okay, in addition to the label guarantees. So human drugs, animal drugs, they all have to go through a really extensive battery of testing to determine efficacy and meet FDA standards, and that generally costs a lot of money and time. Here's a dietary supplement kind of description: a substance for oral consumption, okay, intended specific benefit other than provision of nutrients recognized as essential, or for intended effect on the animal beyond normal nutritional needs, but not including legally defined drugs. That's a pretty broad net. It's an oral substance, may not be recognized as a nutrient, as an essential nutrient, and the intended effect is beyond normal nutritional needs. That's a dietary supplement. So that's a pretty broad brush you're starting to paint with. Here's the one that really is interesting to me. You can position something as a nutraceutical supplement, and that can be sold under the premise of being a dietary supplement, so the definition just above that, for the expressed intent of prevention or treatment of disease. Does that sound familiar to an actual drug description by FDA? It does to me. The drug is to treat or prevent a specific health-related condition. A nutraceutical, expressed intent of prevention or treatment of a disease, right? If it's a nutraceutical supplement, it has no regulatory responsibility it has to abide by whatsoever, other than the dietary supplement guideline. So they can really sort of say what they want, position it as they want. It can be constructed of most anything as long as it's generally regarded as safe ingredients, and there you go. That is a really wide road to travel on, so that you've got a lot of carte blanche about what you want to say about a supplement or not say about a supplement when it falls in the nutraceutical category. Okay? On the human side of the equation, you know, you'd like to think that we're doing a good job on the human side. So if you look at human dietary supplement regulation, there's the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act back in 1994. It'll regulate the manufacturing operations and quality control and the ingredient composition, etc., for human dietary supplements, right? No safety or efficacy data is required before the supplement reaches the consumer. You ought to, boy, won't you sleep good at night now, right? I mean, read that again. No safety or efficiency data is required for somebody to put a supplement out for you or your kids to consume before it reaches you, right? Man, that's got to make you feel good. Your tax dollars at work. Function claims are allowed, so they can make functional claims about a supplement, but must be accompanied by a disclaimer, right? So disclaimer is this is not supported by FDA or something like that. So I can say this will guarantee you to win the Olympics and cure cancer. These claims are not supported by FDA, et cetera, right? In really fine print, all right, that you can't read. But they have a supplement for your eyes to help you read that fine print. That's what works out great. So if you look at animal dietary supplement regulation in the U.S., the human side of that doesn't apply to the animal side, right? That organization that regulates human doesn't apply to the animal side. So AFCO is the Association of American Feed Controllers, Control Officials. It's kind of a self-regulating organization, but it's a good organization. It's a private organization. It works with the FDA in hand to make sure that manufacturers are abiding by what they say they're doing, particularly on the feed side. It doesn't have a lot of effect on the supplement side, though. There is an organization called the National Animal Supplement Council. Again, it's comprised of supplement manufacturers, which, you know, you kind of automatically go, okay, this sounds like the fox guarding the hen house here, right? However, the benefit of this organization is they are supplement manufacturers, but they are supplement manufacturers who generally have put in the time, the effort, the research, and the money to put out what they think are truly efficacious and quality supplements. They got together and said, look, we're busting our hiney to do a good job here. And then you've got Bob's Feed and Bait Shop down the road, who's just putting out any kind of old supplement. So we're at a real competitive disadvantage. We need to come together as an organization and police ourselves and set certain standards that you have to abide by before you get the blessing of the National Animal Supplement Council. So it's a good thing. to help regulate this industry. The one thing about animal supplements is the ingredients must be GRAS, and that's an acronym for generally regarded as safe ingredients. So they can't be using ingredients that are deemed potentially harmful to the horse, all right? But that's a little bit two-sided, because anything in excess can be detrimental, right? You have excess amount of selenium, it's a really bad day. You can have excessive and toxic amounts of certain minerals that are also a bad day. So you can take that with a grain of salt. What they couldn't do is they couldn't put arsenic in, which, I don't know, there's got to be some old timers here that remember some of the old horse traders used to pepper the feed a little bit with arsenic for some old horses that couldn't keep weight on, and that arsenic would kind of stimulate their appetite and eat. And they go buy a sale horse that like starving to death and dump a little arsenic in their feed and get them to eat well, take them back to the same sale about 90, 120 days later, nobody even recognized the horse, sell it for 5 times what they paid for it, and 30 or 60 days later, the person that bought it called them and said, geez, what were you feeding this horse? I can't keep weight on it. True, I'm not proud of this, but my grandpa did that a lot. Anyway. There's no regulations on functional claims, all right? This is what's really crazy. There's no regulatory body saying, well, you can't make that functional claim. Now, you might have some disclaimer options to go with that, but you can virtually say anything you want. And so it's really a buyer beware type of environment, unfortunately. So the National Animal Supplement Council, as I said, it's manufactured animal health supplements. It approves the health and well-being of horses, cats, and dogs. It's not just horses, and other companion animals. And they will work with state, federal, international government officials because they really want to establish some sort of standard. So if you go buy a supplement, or you're looking to buy a supplement, see if they are members of this organization, and see if they've got a primary supplier quality seal, if they've got a preferred vendor quality seal, if they're not making their own supplements but are having them toll milled by somebody, find out if that toll miller falls under these guidelines that the NASC have established and that they are members. And in order to be a member, you have to abide by the standards that they establish. So that gives you at least some peace of mind, right? Still not 100% guaranteed. So what's the process to evaluate a nutritional supplement or a feed or anything else nutritionally? There's a pyramid of an approach for this in assessing the safety and efficacy of a dietary supplement, and you start out with expert opinion, right, as the lowest rung on the ladder. Expert opinions are great from a marketing perspective, but an expert opinion may very well have just been bought and paid for, right, as a sponsor. They're a sponsored entity that talks well about them. So if you look at kind of a dashed line, if you will, when you look at professional in vivo and in vitro research, pathophysiological rationale, research in other species, and historical use. Well, you can look, or I can look as a PhD nutritionist, I can look at a label and I can say, well, here's the physiological reason that this might work, based on the ingredients, based on what I know about nutrition, and based on the physiology of the animal. I could look also at the research in other species. That oftentimes is what some companies will take to extrapolate to benefits in horses. Never ever make that extrapolation. A chicken is not a horse, it's not a pig, it's not a human. There are similarities in physiology, there's no question about it, right? But you can't make that type of an extrapolation because there are some real differences nutritionally between species that you don't want to make that stretch. In other words, the copper, let me give you a great example. The copper content of most horse feeds is going to kill sheep that you feed it to. That's a bad day. So if you got a feed that works great on horses and you say, well shoot, I'm going to feed this to my sheep, you have a bunch of dead sheep because the copper level in horse feed's too high to be safe when you're going to feed it to sheep. You can use historical use is good. If a supplement's been out there for a long time and a lot of people use it and they feel like it does something for them, they don't really know for sure, but it's been out there for 10 years, so, you know, can't be bad, or at least it's not killing anything.
Case studies are good. Models of disease, epidemiological studies, which is just taking a bunch of people, a bunch of horses that's been applied to, and you kind of look at the overall effect. You know, the gold standard is really when they're doing controlled research using horses, and they can point to the data and say, yep, this stuff does this, and here's the research to show you the efficacy of it. And some folks out there do that, some supplement companies do that on a fairly regular basis. A lot of them are extrapolating from other species, other ingredient stories. So how many supplements do you need, right? I was always curious about this. So I did a Google search for horse supplements. 89,300,000 sites came up if you put in horse supplements. 89 million. If you put in horse nutrition supplements, okay, kind of broaden the scope a little bit or narrow it, if you however you want to look at it, you get 42 million, almost 43 million. If you put in equine supplements, because equine is again a little more foreign than just horse, you're down to 11 million. If you put equine nutritional supplements in, you're approaching 2 million. Now, there are about 9 million horses in the U.S. So if you look at the low end of around 2 million, that's about 5 horses per website out there dealing with equine or horse-related nutritional supplements. If you look at the high end, you've got about 10 websites out there addressing at some various level nutritional supplements per horse, for pity's sakes. So there is a tsunami of supplements out there for horses. That in itself ought to tell you, man, I'm really going to have to try to separate the wheat from the chaff here, right? And it's not an easy thing to do. More or less supplements over time. So back in about 2009, somewhere in there, I looked through an equine supplement catalog, right? And I counted. Obviously, I don't have a lot to do. So I counted all the supplements in this. There are 469 total supplements. And I broke out some of them by joint, hoof, gut health, performance, calming, all right? Because I thought those were interesting categories. Here just recently, I looked at Smart Pack 2019, all right? 423 different supplements in Smart Pack for horses, all right? You think we got more or less joint supplements now?
More.
Got 143, about the same. More or less hoof supplements?
More.
Got 63 more hoof supplements now. Based on 2009 and 2019, the number of joint and hoof supplements, you would think horses could not walk, right? They were incapable of moving based on the number of hoof and joint supplements. What about gut health? We got more or less? We got a little bit less. This actually kind of surprised me a little bit. I thought there would be more, but the reason I think gut health is a little bit less, it's a little bit more difficult to produce and have something of some sort of demonstrated efficacy there, but I was surprised that there's actually less. What about performance, more or less? It's almost, no, there's over double the amount of performance-related substances. So obviously they can't walk, they can't move, and they can't perform in 10 years, even worse. What about calming, more or less? Yeah, double the amount of calming supplements available. You know what's really fascinating to me about the calming supplements, right? So that you look through all those calming supplements and you look at the feature benefits and you look at the stuff that's on the label, and not one of them had listed how it impacts RIA syndrome, right? Related to calming. Not one, which I thought was really amazing. Are you familiar with RIA syndrome?
No.
Writer-induced anxiety syndrome, right? Not one of those calming supplements address that issue, which to me is like the primary cause of horses not being calm, but that's just me. So let's look at just a snapshot of some supplement research use. And this was Feed Management Practices, a study done back in 2008 at Burke and Williams in New Jersey. They looked at a 3-day event, the Jersey Fresh 3-day event, 2006-2007. On average, the horses in this high-level event were using 4 supplements per horse, in addition to a high-quality feed program. Okay? Most of them were electrolytes, joint, digestive, and antioxidants. Those were the 4 largest or the most used types of supplements. And like I said, in the majority of just the base diets were nutritionally sound. They were getting all the nutrients that you could probably want a horse to get and then some. So the real bottom line take home from this study was the main concern was over supplementation and the potential negative effects it has on performance. And that was the real take-home message. So we're supplementing our performance horses to the point of negatively impacting their performance in some instances. Here's a standard kind of graph to demonstrate nutrient relates to performances. In other words, there's always a bell curve. Everything in life, I think, just about has a bell curve, right? So if I have a certain amount of intake of a nutrient, I could end up being deficient. And then there's a fairly good size span in there that would we consider optimal, right, for the average horse. And then we get over to the far end where you could actually be in a toxic level. And you can apply that to any ingredient, even water, right? You can die of thirst, you're hydrated well, or you can actually become overhydrated to the point where you can risk some toxicity issues. I know it sounds crazy, but see how long you can hold your breath. There's an example. So in this kind of wider plateau of optimal intake for the average horse, remember I said average, so now let's shift that to high performance or comparatively. And this is a simple little graph I put together. Over here on the left-hand side, I've got under, which is, first I've got optimal in a dashed line. That's the target to deliver optimal nutrition to this horse, wherever they are. And then over, I'm in excess, or feeding them more, whatever vitamin, mineral supplements than they need. And then there's under, being under that optimal level. And then on the bottom there, I got performance. And at the far left is low, which means that's old Bucky standing out there in the pasture and never has to work a day in his life, right? Anybody know people that have horses like that? Right? So you got horses just standing around in pasture ornaments, right? And on the far right is high performance. Those are elite athletes, Olympic caliber, or working really hard, whether it's cutter, reiner, or ranch horse, right? Hard-working ranch horse on a day. Those are equine athletes at a high end of performance. What happens when I look at this nutritional accuracy, and so I've got a line at the, 2 lines, one on top, one on the bottom there, both of them angled. So at the very far left where it's low, that's that horse that's standing out there in maintenance. My nutritional accuracy doesn't have to be very accurate. I mean, old Bucky will get along with a lot of fluctuations in his daily feeding program, right? As long as you're not feeding him, 5 pounds of grain concentrate one day and nothing the next. But as far as actual nutrient intake, it doesn't matter that he varies quite a bit on his grams of protein per day or the amount of copper or magnesium he takes in per day. Any different than you and I. When we sit down at the dinner table, are we digesting the same amount of nutrients we did the day before? Well, probably not, right? It's pretty variable. And if you look at young growing kids, it could be all over the freaking map. Take Olympic athletes, human Olympic athletes. Their diets at that level are regulated to an unbelievable degree, to where they are being delivered a prescribed amount per day depending when they're in their training stage, working up towards a plateau of performance. Their diets are really tightly regulated on the energy, protein, minerals, vitamins that they take in. The same type of control and optimal delivery for the performance horse could benefit them as well. So when I look at a feed that I know is fortified where it needs to be, and I know exactly how many pounds per day they're going to feed that horse, and we have a pretty good understanding of the quality of hay that they're feeding, that's the largest variable, right, is the hay. I can really look and see where that horse is nutritionally nutrient intake. When I start throwing supplements in, if I don't know the complete composition of those supplements, then I've got some guesswork on my optimal dash line that I'm hitting. And I want to hit that as close as I can as that performance meter goes further and further to the high end of performance. Does that make sense? right? Okay. And that's why sometimes we can get into problems with high-end performance horses being over-supplemented, and they fall off that optimal target. So we mentioned joint supplements. I'm going to touch on them a little bit because you know that's close to what you do, right? That gets down into your neck of the woods. 40% of the supplements tested contain less glucose, and I'm focusing on glucosamine, chondroitin, sulfate type supplements. So 40% of them that were tested back in 2006 contain less glucosamine than was listed on the label. All right? So when you get a joint supplement, there's about a 50% chance that you're grabbing a supplement that doesn't have the amount of glucosamine listed on the label. It has less than that. Glucosamine, hydrochloride, the bioavailability of that is about 5.9%. So if you've got this wonderful amount of glucosamine in that form in a particular supplement, well, that's great, but only about 6% of it's going to be bioavailable. Chondroitin sulfate, same thing. It's a higher bioavailability because it's a lower molecular weight ingredient. Again, about 32% bioavailable. The other thing about chondroitin and glucosamine is they are synergistic with one another. They help one another work. And here's the daily dosage recommendation today of glucosamine and chondroitin. So if you look at a supplement and they say, here's how much you need to feed, if it doesn't supply these levels of glucosamine and chondroitin sulfate, then you're probably really not doing much service to hitting those levels that you need to have a positive impact on joints. And even with that, there's still question about the real efficacy of adding glucosamine and chondroitin sulfate for joint benefits. There's more and more data that shows benefit, but there's still some horses that receive it that don't respond very well. And as far as a specific brand, which I'd look at Cosequin as still kind of the gold standard as far as a glucosamine chondroitin supplement. Now, I'm going to mention some specific brands because I don't have an affiliation. I don't sell any of them. I don't do the nutritional work, even though I used to be with Purina and KER and Alltech and all them. I don't do any specific work for them, so I'm not here hawking a product if you see it up here, and I'm not here to talk negatively about it. I'm just giving you my professional opinion. So I don't have any skin in the game on any of the products that come up here. So there's a lot of other joint type supplements. You got MSM and hyaluronic acid and acetylmethylmalate and yucca and silica. And, you know, the problem is there's not a lot of good data to support their use and their efficacy. But some people will swear by them. Well, that's great. If you really think you're getting a benefit for your horse, then get after it. I'm just saying that the data is not out there to support these as much as there is for glucosamine and chondroitin sulfate, particularly that Cosequin's done a lot of that work, by the way. The electrolyte side is another big component that folks use. And typically, horses in pretty intense training are not going to receive enough electrolytes in their normal feeding program because they just sweat, particularly in warm environments. The sweat loss can't keep up with just your base feed. So that's where you look at electrolyte supplements. And really it's sodium and chloride are the primary drivers, potassium to a lesser extent. The big thing about a lot of commercial electrolyte supplements is they've got a ton of sugar in them, right? I mean, and part of that is to facilitate them to drink it in water, give it that Kool-Aid kind of sweet taste. But there's supplement products out there that will facilitate electrolyte delivery without a lot of that sugar content in there, right? So if you can find those, you'd probably be better off, in my opinion, to use those. And there's some other things about electrolytes that I'll touch on as well. One thing that we've seen with electrolyte supplementation, particularly in endurance horses, so extended periods of sweat loss, that when you provide electrolytes, they drank more water than if they weren't provided electrolytes. So that it facilitates rehydration, which is really important to like 3-day eventers, or if you got a horse doing multiple bouts in a weekend in a really hot environment, you've got to keep them hydrated, right? And so it helps with that as well. The other thing is a repeated electrolyte administration can actually facilitate gastric ulcer problems. So if you're giving that horse electrolyte supplementation on a regular basis, you're going to contribute to making those gastric ulcers worse than what they already may be. And most any horse that's on a regular training regimen that they're galloping, they're going to have gastric ulcers. They just will. They are. They're there, right? So you've already got them. You want to try to minimize making them any worse than they already are. And so the other thing is management of the administration of electrolytes is important. So if you got a horse in hard training, it's a hot day, and they need electrolyte replenishment, then absolutely you need to use it. But on days where you back off on the training and they don't sweat as profusely, think about backing off on the electrolyte use. Or if they're laid up and they're not using, don't be giving electrolyte supplements when they're not needing them, because you can get into some negative consequences with them. You know, and as far as, you know, you recognize polo, particularly down in your neck of the woods now, John, down there, a hot, humid environment. A lot of polo horses down in Florida. Dressage, I don't know what's going on here, this deal here. This isn't a comment on electrolytes, like this horse didn't have any electrolytes, look what happened to him. That's not really it. All I know is it really sucks to be that one guy right there. You know, this guy here, that's a bad day, no matter what kind of electrolytes that horse has. So there's another thing about electrolytes, and this is primarily for the racetrack side, but it's interesting. Well, not the racetrack. Got any barrel racers in here? Nope, no barrel racers, really? Yeah. Do you have any barrel racer clients? All right, there you go. They use a ton of Lasix, a lot of them. I mean, my God, they've got like jugs of it that they're using for these horses. The thing about Lasix is, and a lot of times they're on a regular electrolyte, you know, to replenish that, because Lasix causes the horses to urinate a lot. And for racetracks, they do that so to prevent the possibility of bleeding, a pulmonary hemorrhage in the lungs, a bleeder. For barrel horses, it's not so much a bleeding issue as they like to have them urinate out about 5-10 pounds, because that's less weight they got to carry in that barrel room. But that's a primary driver, which is insane. That's my opinion. But anyway, when you look at using Lasix, that horse is going to dump 40 to 50 times the amount of sodium and chloride out through the urine than a normal horse, not receiving Lasix, right? So if you've got horses on Lasix, your clients' horses are on Lasix, they are dumping a ton of sodium and chloride out that a normal horse wouldn't do in sweating, right? In addition to that. And so that's a real issue. The other thing about it is Lasix also facilitates a bunch of calcium loss as well. A huge amount of calcium loss. That can have a really negative aspect on a horse's performance. How many electrolytes do you know contain calcium? Not very many. Not very many. So that's a real issue that you won't see in horses that are not on Lasix, don't have this type of calcium loss. So if you look at electrolytes specifically for clients who are using heavy levels of Lasix, then look at something that's certainly got higher levels of sodium and chloride, but also calcium. And then there's some other things about electrolytes we'll get to in general. The only product that I know of right now is one that KER has come out with called Race Recovery, that addresses this kind of specific electrolyte loss that Lasix drives. And that's the only one I know out there today. Right? And Joe's done a bunch of good research to document the efficacy of that. The other thing about electrolytes is when you feed a concentrated electrolyte dose, you know, that drives a real heavy surge all of a sudden from a blood absorption standpoint of electrolytes. Well, that facilitates the kidney to go to work saying, whoa, man, I've got a lot of salt and sodium and chloride. I need to urinate some of this out. So when you give an electrolyte bolus or solution, you're actually telling the horse physiologically that, man, I got to clear some of this out because I get this big spike in my serum, right? And so they go to work so that they clear out about half the electrolyte you just gave them through urination, and they'll drink more, flushing that out. So again, if you can deliver an electrolyte that has a slow release over a period of time that doesn't cause a big spike, then you're more effectively using the electrolyte supplement you're giving them, right? And again, the only one that I know of that has kind of a coated electrolyte component to facilitate a slow release and slow absorption is a KER product called Restore. Now again, I don't get any commission or anything else. I'm just telling you what I know as far as what's out there. This is an interesting graph that you need to just kind of keep in mind when it comes to minerals primarily. This picture demonstrates the interactions that minerals have with one another, right? So a lot of times minerals will share the same binding and absorption site in the intestine that another mineral might. So if I have a mineral, or I'm providing a supplement that has a high level of iron, right? That iron could be blocking the absorption of other key minerals to where you could actually facilitate deficiencies of other minerals like copper and chloride with an excessive amount of iron, for example. So be careful about supplementing individual minerals. And be careful about over-supplementation of minerals, because you could inadvertently be driving a deficiency of another mineral just by blocking the absorption and utilization of it. You hear a lot about organic trace minerals. And organic minerals, there's lots of different types that manufacturers can put in a product and still use the terminology organic or chelated on the label, right? And so these are the different types that you can have. And really, the one that's most effective as far as availability is a form that's a metal proteinate. And that means you take a metal like zinc and it's attached to a small protein. And what that does, it kind of helps protect that mineral within the transport and absorption in the small intestine, but it's not bound so hard that they can't absorb it at all. Some of these others are either bound so tightly to that mineral that it diminishes the opportunity for it to even get absorbed, right? And others are bound so loosely that they get lost and displaced and never get absorbed effectively, right? So if I start looking at a chelate, I'd like to see one that are in a proteinate form primarily. And the fact that organic or chelated minerals are absorbed and have a greater bioavailability than inorganic forms. And that's a truism across a lot of species. The research is not as extensive in horse, but the research that has been done demonstrates a similar type of pattern that we would expect. The other thing about minerals that's a little scary is the sourcing, but also what is the company doing to look at the quality of the minerals? What this graph is showing is different amounts of minerals in different years, and the percentage reflects the percent of samples with at least one heavy metal. And heavy metals can be extremely toxic, like lead or mercury, or cadmium, stuff like that, right? And so you sure don't want it in your diet. It's not such a good thing in a horse diet. But look at the number of samples that had at least one heavy metal exceeding the limits established for safety or for safety standards. And this was one supplier, okay? And so the number of samples rejected in 2014, or the number of samples, it was 30% of the samples that they took had heavy metal contents that suggested they would reject them, which they did. But not all manufacturers have this type of quality control program put in place. This is a particular quality control program that Alltech uses, right? So they really evaluate the mineral coming in for whatever product they're going to use. Other companies do that also. But you really need to do a little homework to find out if that's the case, because you don't want 30% of the product you're buying have a concentration of heavy metals above the level that you'd like to see. Probiotic, prebiotic yeast, lots of that stuff out there. There's really been no demonstrated benefit in horses that are normal on a normal diet. The other thing about probiotics is you can really decrease their efficacy with processing like pelleting, things like that. You may see some benefits for horses eating a large quantity of grain that dry, like horses at the track. They're sometimes eating anywhere from 12 to 20 pounds of a grain-based concentrate per day. It sounds insane, but some of them are there. Some horses that have received a lot of antibiotic therapy that were sick, these types of products can help reestablish that gut microbiome. The other thing that I think are even more effective than probiotics are prebiotics. Prebiotics are elements, usually of like a yeast cell wall, that provide desirable nutrients to desirable bacteria already in the horse's GI system. So you're feeding the good bacteria with prebiotics to make them grow and have a healthier overall microbiome in that horse. And they, you know, there's some efficacy there that's been demonstrated in a lot of other species. Again, not as much data in horses, but the extrapolation there is less risky than in other types of ingredients. And eventually they're going to show, I think, a better consistent response in horses. Yeast, again, there's a demonstrated benefit for increased fiber digestion in dairy and beef cattle. Limited demonstrated benefits in horses, but it can improve some fiber digestibility. It's just not consistently been shown. Ergogenic aids mean working, to increase work and productivity. There's lots of them: gamma-rosinol, creatine, L-carnitine. Again, none of these have been shown or been demonstrated with good research to show a consistent benefit to horses from a performance standpoint. However, there seems to be a fair amount of historical or anecdotal support for compounds like these. I think, you know, if you're going to have somebody that wants to try it, certainly try it and try to be as objective you can about evaluating the benefit of these things. Here's the other thing that you need to be careful of. How many people have clients that are associated with the FEI or the United States Equine Federation, and usually certainly hunter jumpers, dressage, 3-day eventers, those types of horses. So FEI has a fairly extensive list of prohibited substances, and a lot of them are in supplements. So if you have people, and you can go to the FEI website, they have the whole list of prohibited substances there. So if they're using a supplement with certain prohibited substances, you might want to suggest to them, man, you need to be careful. And some people go, well, yeah, but there's not very much of this in here. Okay, what are the other 3 or 4 supplements you're using? What's in them that will contribute to you getting a blood test that's going to kick you out of the deal, right? That's a bad day. So just be really careful about not only individual supplements, but what are the 2, 3, or 4 that they're using collectively going to contribute to a potential problem. So let's talk about something that's probably closer to your heart, and that's biotin, and we'll talk about hooves. Again, biotin is an ingredient that has not a consistent, it doesn't show a consistent benefit based on controlled research, right? Fed it to horses, it's hard to measure a real benefit. But there's definitely horses, there's a small percentage of horses out there that will benefit from biotin supplementation. But by and large, horses that are on a good nutritional program, you're not going to see that kind of benefit with them. And that's, again, that they're on a good nutrition program. 10 to 30 milligrams, you might see some benefit, again, in that population of horses that you would expect to see that. You ought to have a supplement that's at least targeting, I think, 20 milligrams per day of biotin. And then in the horse, there's really no dietary requirement that's been established for biotin. So I'm going to look at 3 hoof supplements here. One's Farrier's Formula Double Strength. And Farrier Formula has been around for a long time, and it's kind of been kind of a gold standard of hoof supplements. The AFA hoof supplement is one that's just coming out. And then there's a Platinum Performance Advanced hoof supplement that I looked as well. If you look at Farrier's Formula, double strength, for an 11-pound container, you're going to pay about $96, right? For about a 9.3-pound container of the AFA hoof supplement, you're going to pay about $65. And for 1 pound of Platinum Advanced hoof supplement, you're going to pay $140, all right? Which one are you going to buy? Which one are you going to buy? Don't be cowards. Come on, speak up.
Was that all the information we got?
What else do you need? He said, is that all the information you got? What else do you need to know?
We needed, if there's any science behind it, and if it's
Okay, any science behind it? Let's say they all have science behind it. What else do you need to know to direct your customer to a good decision? Just based on the price of this stuff, what else do you need to know?
How long is it going to last?
How long is it going to last, right?
Shelf life.
So this 1 pound deal for $140 makes you fall off your horse, right? But if I'm just going to provide them 4 cc's per day, the cost per day may be better than the other ones for $96 or $65 per day. You follow me? So it's not just the cost of that container, and it's not just the cost per day of the amount you're going to feed. What are we trying to deliver here?
Most bang for your buck.
We're trying to deliver biotin specifically, right? How much biotin am I actually delivering today, and what's the cost of that delivery per day? Right? So those are all the questions that you need to put in. You can't just look at these containers and go, holy, I'd never pay $140 for a 1 pound deal. But you might if the cost per day of delivering the ingredients that are important to hoof development may be the best value that you get out of all 3 of those. So let's take a look at some of that. So there's a cost per container that unfortunately people make a lot of decisions just based on cost per container. There's a cost per pound, all right? And that may not always tell you what you need to know. And then there's a cost per day. Right? So how much of this am I going to have to feed per day, and what's it going to cost me? And then the really thing is the cost per day per active ingredient that I'm trying to get to them to make a difference of that hoof. That make sense? And then, of course, there's the cost per day plus perceived benefit plus peace of mind. Right? And then it doesn't matter. It didn't matter if that 1 pound costs $1,400. If the owner thinks that they have to have it, then by God, use something that some of my Texas friends use a lot to describe a certain situation. Just say, well, bless your heart. Anybody from Texas or Oklahoma kind of know what that means? Yeah, so, when they get to that point where they know there's a benefit and they're going to pay a lot of money and it's probably not, just say, well, bless your heart. There you go. So let's take a look at some comparisons here. So on the left here, I've got what I consider ingredients that could have potential impacts on hoof growth and development, that being biotin, D-L-methionine, cysteine or cysteine, zinc, copper, and maybe manganese. Manganese is to me is kind of iffy. Copper is relative. Zinc, potentially. D-L-methionine, cysteine are 2 amino acids that definitely have an impact on the type of growth that hoof is, that being keratin, just like your hair and skin. And then biotin, is the one thing that we've demonstrated could have a benefit. If you look at Farrier's formula, they're running a double strength, depending on the amount they recommend you to feed, anywhere from 10 to 20 milligrams. The AFA hoof supplement that's coming out, they're running at 30 milligrams of biotin. And then the Platinum Performance, again, depending on the amount that they recommend, delivers 10 megs per day. But I kind of suggest that it really ought to be 20. So, if I'm going to recommend this, I say you probably ought to feed twice the amount that they actually recommend, so you get to 20 milligrams of biotin. And then you can see some of the other comparisons there. The only one that has cysteine in it is the Farrier's formula double strength. I think that's probably something that others could consider adding for complete efficacy of ingredients directed towards the hoof. A couple of them don't have manganese. The Platinum Performance does, but again, manganese, in my opinion, is relatively irrelevant to overall hoof quality and growth. There may be some benefit there, but not much. Here's the thing I talked about earlier. If you look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 6 ingredients, well, the Farrier's formula has 18. The AFA hoof supplement has 28 28 total ingredients. Platinum Performance has about 7. So obviously Farrier's formula and AFA hoof supplement has a number of ingredients in there that probably aren't a direct benefit to the hoof. They have yeast, they have probiotics, they have things like that. They're not going to do any harm, but you're paying for those, right? The Platinum Performance one is a pretty narrow ingredient listing, really targeting the hoof. So from my perspective, that's a good thing. Ingredients of concern, I've got cobalt listed here in both of the AFA. The AFA didn't give an amount, so I don't know what that is. Platinum Performance has 950 micrograms, which is a really small amount, right? The thing about cobalt, it's recently been added to the FEI banned or controlled substance list, right? Now, the amount of cobalt in this Platinum Performance thing is negligible. It's really small, right? So that by itself is probably not going to get anybody in trouble with cobalt. But again, what other supplements are they using that could contribute to this issue? You just need to be cognizant of that. And then you look at a cost per day. The single strength Farrier formula is 11-pound pail is $2.35 per day. The double strength at the replenish amount is $1.64 compared to a maintenance amount of 82 cents. The AFA supplements at $1.05 per day. The platinum at 10 megs, their recommendation is 75 cents per day, but I really think you ought to be around 20 milligrams of biotin, so that puts it at $1.50. So, you know, when you look at it that way, you can maybe help steer your clientele to as good a decision as you can. Well, how much is water worth to you, right? I'm not picking on Farrier's formula. Anybody who is familiar with Farrier's, or excuse me, Red Cell? Who's familiar with Red Cell? It's been around. I mean, Noah had a jug of Red Cell, right, on the boat with him. I'm sure he did. It's been around forever. And I'm not picking on it. I mean, there's a lot of people that use it. I'm using it as an example for liquid-based supplements, okay? So it has water and a lot of iron. Ferric sulfate are the two primary ingredients. So when you look at it and you do the math, which I did and broke down, it's about 89% water, right? That means you've got about a pound of ingredients, which means you're paying almost $25 for a gallon of water. Right? That's some pretty damn good water. And don't laugh too hard, because we're paying, what, $2 for a friggin' bottle of water? Right? Okay. So just be cognizant of supplements that have a water base. Unless there's a real specific reason why it has to be suspended in water, I don't want to pay for water, because I can just open my tap up and satisfy that nutrient requirement. So really, the base should be feed for no need of supplements. Have a good feed program that's high quality, provides the daily vitamin minerals. You know, most feed companies, good feed companies, their mid-price and premium feeds are over-fortified. Our horses have absolutely the most expensive urine and manure in the world, all right? So it's not like they're deficient in vitamin and minerals already. I mean, if you could extract the minerals and vitamins from the manure and urine of horses, you could open up your own feed company, right? So, and usually you're looking at $1.50 to $3 per day for a bag feed, depending on the type and brand of feed. That's not including senior feeds, because you feed a lot more of senior feeds. So you look at that cost, it's also providing protein and calories compared to the cost of the biotin supplements that are around $1 to $1.50 per day. Hay is the largest variable, both in quality and price. And if there's ever an opportunity where you might need to look at supplementing a part of your diet, it's that hay component, particularly a lot of horses that don't need a bag feed, that aren't working for a living, but just out there, you know, the ones that can get fat on asphalt and air, and you just got them a little bit of hay, and you might want to supply them some vitamin mineral to provide the vitamin mineral components of their diet. There's lots of good products out there. You know, ADM has a good product, a mineral-based product that John let me use. Purina has good products. I mean, there's a lot of good, and that's the other thing about feed companies. There's a lot of good feed companies. We all know Purina and Nutrina and some of the bigger ones, and they do a great job. But there's lots of good regional mills that are doing a good job making horse feed as well. So in summary, safety and efficacy of a supplement in humans does not guarantee safety in horses. Don't make that extrapolation. There's really limited regulatory guidelines on equine supplements. I mean, they can say just about anything. It can be about anything in that container. you really have to do your homework there to try to make good recommendations. The excuse me, I got one too many S's in there. But the NACS, look for those seals. Look to see if they're affiliated with that, and that at least gives you some indication of quality and efficacy. It's difficult to determine unless you got a nutritional background sometime by looking at the ingredients and really understanding what they may or may not mean. So find somebody that you can talk to if you're concerned about a supplement. There's nutritionists out there. There's people that work for a feed company that might be able to help you or be willing to help you. Your veterinarian may know a PhD nutritionist that they can call and say, hey, we need some answers here because I don't want to recommend this to my clients if I'm not doing a good job for them. Excessive supplementation can be detrimental. Right? We tend to err on the side of excess, and that's not a good day. The better the quality and management of your feeding program, the less need or benefit of supplements. Right? If you do a good job feeding, you probably don't have a lot of need for supplements. Not to say that there may be some horses that have a high-end performance you'll have to benefit. That's fine. Just make sure you know what you're doing. And I'll leave you with this picture of God's country just a little bit north of here. So, any questions? Yes, ma'am.
I came in a little bit late. Have you discussed the freshness aspect? Do we have products that get too old to be used?
Okay. Her question was, have I discussed like the freshness aspect of products, not just supplements, but horse feed in general? I did not address that issue, but let me address your question. There's two types of dating that companies use. One's called a Julian code, which might as well be hieroglyphics because you have no idea what it means as far as the company does, because that's their code. And they can say, some of them use a best use by date. Again, that doesn't tell you when it was manufactured, right? It just gives you a best use by date, which generally they're going to err on the side of a little longer, right? Because they've got it warehoused, inventory. The dealer has it sitting on their shelf for X number of days. So that best use by date sometimes is carried out maybe a little longer than you'd like. And then there's some companies that actually use a manufactured date code. That's great, right? The problem that sometimes causes is if somebody looks at a pelleted feed and it's 2 weeks old, they make the assumption it's too old. And it's not. Pelleted feeds can be good and stable for 4 months. As long as it's not wet, it doesn't get moldy, right? But in a dry environment, stored properly, 4 to 6 months, pelleted feed can have shelf life. Texturized feed with molasses, that's generally a little less because of some of the more raw ingredients and the drying out issue. Not necessarily the nutritional value, but just drying out. People don't like it as much. Generally, you're looking at 30 to 60 days on textured feed before it might get too dry for you to like it. That doesn't mean the nutritional value has gone away. And generally, the nutrients that are time sensitive, like some of the vitamins, they've got a pretty good shelf life again out to that 6 month period, really. The fresher the better always, right? But you don't always get that option. Any other questions? Nutrition in general. Yes, sir.
What happens with thumbs?
I'm sorry.
What happens with thumbs?
Thumps? You asked the question, what happens with thumps? And thumps is oftentimes related to a potential potassium or phosphorus deficiency, where it causes a little irregular diaphragmatic contraction in breathing. So sometimes that can respond well to supplementation or a better quality diet that has adequate amounts of potassium phosphorus. And then aside from that, I'm not a veterinarian, so I can't comment on medical type treatments. You just need to confer with your vet. But from a nutritional standpoint, sometimes there is a deficient mineral standard that you might be dealing with for some horses. Anything else? All righty. Thank you.